Hi everyone, my name is Brendan Dodds and I'm a director here at Risk-Based Security. Really appreciate everyone being here today and spending some time with us. Welcome to today's webinar focused on how you can mature your vulnerability management program using vulnerability intelligence. And over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we'll show you how you can improve your response time and identify and mitigate vulnerabilities without the need for time-intensive and very disruptive scanning. So before we get started, I get the fun job of walking through a few housekeeping tips so we can all get the most out of today's session. The recording of today's session will be made available on BrightTalk and on our website. So bookmark this link, share it with your friends and colleagues. Please pass this on and help other people get value. This is the latest in a series of webinars that are focused on trends and issues in data breaches and vulnerabilities. And we don't want you to miss out. So please take a moment to subscribe to the Risk-Based Security channel on BrightTalk. And we love to hear from you. We do want your questions, so please do post them here in BrightTalk in the box provided. We may address them as we go, but we will definitely pause for Q&A at the end of the session as well. And if you're watching the replay or you want to get in touch with us for any other reason, you can do so via the contact page on our website at riskbasedsecurity.com. Well, as I said, my name is Brendan Dodds and I will be moderating today's session. But that means I get to introduce our presenter for today. And today's session is going to be led by Michael Mortensen, our European Director of Security and Risk Intelligence here at Risk-Based Security. And Michael draws on 17 years of experience in the threat intelligence and risk management industry. He was the Senior Managing Consultant for Vulnerability Intelligence at Secunia. He worked for NSS Labs as the European Director of Enterprise Accounts and as a Senior Account Executive with Gartner. So it's my pleasure to hand you over to Michael, who's going to take us through today's agenda.
Thank you very much for that, Brendan, and welcome everyone. So I hope that you will leave this webinar after the next 30 to 45 minutes with the feeling that time was well spent and hopefully also learn a few new things down the road. Let me first walk you through the agenda to what we will cover in this session today. So the first thing would be to zoom in on the dramatic rise in the number of vulnerabilities that we have seen in the last 10+ years. Then we would look at why we need to care about the 75,000 plus confirmed vulnerabilities that are missed by CV and NVD and the implication of that. Then we'll look at the traditional or typical vulnerability scanning approach and how that is different from the VI approach. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into define and understand what is actually vulnerability intelligence and how can you apply that to your vulnerability management process. And then there will be a few examples in terms of how the VI data from the VulnDB solution will be able to help you prioritize and understand more about the vulnerabilities that you are dealing with. So with that, let's move into the next page. As mentioned, there has been a dramatic rise in the number of vulnerabilities reported over the past 10 years. In 2010, there were 9,300 vulnerabilities reported, and last year more than 23,000. This means that there are way more vulnerabilities out there than any organization can handle. I don't think there is any organization who would have the resources or power to fix all the vulnerabilities at the same time. But the good news is that I would not even say that is needed or should be the goal. However, what should be the goal is to know about all the vulnerabilities that impact your asset so you can make a risk-based decision on which vulnerabilities you need to take care of first in accordance with your resources. But with that many vulnerabilities that we're dealing with today, everyone has to prioritize, and that's basically the key message here. That takes me to the next page about the missing CVEs. Let's first be clear on what that is. CVE is the Common Vulnerability and Exposure. It's a US government-funded program run by MITRE. The intent is to have a dictionary and provide a unique identifier for each vulnerability, a CVE ID. It's not a vulnerability database, and it's not an organization that actively look for new vulnerabilities. NVD is the National Vulnerability Database, which is another US government-funded program. They take the CVE ID and then they try to add helpful information to that. So basically the process is that from a CVE ID is assigned, that will then stay in the CVE database and then later move out to the NVD database where the information will be publicly available. However, too many would have the perception or default understanding that CVE and NVD is complete, and a lot of different tools, including security vendors, rely on the NVD database because it's very convenient that you virtually can walk in there, grab the data, and then use them in your own commercial product. However, the big problem with that is that CVE and NVD miss more than 75,000 confirmed vulnerabilities. This translates to around 30 to 35%. On top of that, there will be many more CVE IDs which are in a reserve mode and stay there for days, weeks, and months until it moves over to the NVD database. Another problem is that many vulnerabilities need to be updated on a continuous basis as new information is uncovered, and you will not get all the updated information either. You may think that this is a new problem, but that's not the reality. Actually, CVE has been underperforming for many years. If we just look at the last 5 years and we compare the data set to the VulnDB database, we can see that they consistently lag in the coverage of tracking new vulnerabilities. VulnDB tracks all the CVE IDs, wherefore it's very easy to see the exact delta. And I can add that already here in 2020, have they missed more than 2,900 confirmed vulnerabilities. Then we might think that, well, okay, they miss a lot, but it's hopefully not in the important piece of software. Well, we can tell you that it is actually impacting all the major vulnerabilities in well-known software from Apple, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Cisco, and many, many more. So when we zoom in and say, okay, what are these vulnerabilities that are missed? Then it calls to some attention. We did a study on 2019 where we can see that 43.5% of all the non-CVEs had a criticality level between 7 and 10 on the CVSS severity scale. That is the vulnerabilities that are rated high and very critical. And that would be the ones that we would not like to miss when we need to manage the risk in our network. Furthermore, we could see that the timeliness of what was covered in 2019 on average had a delay between 7 to 12 weeks. This does not give the organization the time that they need to get ahead of the attacker, which is why this is very critical. So we cannot ignore this as the lack of data would definitely matters. And that brings me into the next part here, which is speaking around the scanning approach. Since the world depends on scanning to do vulnerability management, and well over 50% of all the data breaches are from exploited software vulnerabilities, this is a serious risk. The problem here is that most of the scanners are fundamentally relying on the CVE and NVD database. Take, for example, Nessus. They cover less than half of all the NVD entries that are there. So it's not even a full copy, it's less than half of it. So in the expectation that you run a scan that will detect the vulnerabilities that are publicly known in your network is not stronger than where the data input comes from. And therefore, many of the scanning tools turn to the NVD database, which is where they pull the data from to create their signatures. If you would question this, you could try to see next time that you run a scan, how many vulnerabilities does it detect that does not have a CVE ID? And you can also ask your scanning supplier which sources they rely on to create their signatures. If we look at the traditional scanning approach, as mentioned earlier, we need to deal with vulnerabilities every day. There's nothing we can do about that. But what is within our control is how we approach it. In the traditional scanning approach, a new vulnerability gets out. You are dependent on the scanning vendor pick up that new vulnerability, do the necessary analysis and assessment to create a signature that has to be uploaded to the scanning database. None of the scanning tools are designed in a way where they can automatically discover a new vulnerability in using machine learning or AI or anything else. It's only as strong as the signature input that goes into the scanning engine. And these signatures are created based on the review of the new vulnerability that has been disclosed. Therefore, it will always be a reactive approach. Now, once that does happen, then you would have to submit the change control, so you will be able to launch your scan. And then once you get the scan results back, you would be able to start review all the details and then send it out to the different product owners and teams for remediation. But this approach can miss many critical vulnerabilities, and it can take days, weeks, or months. In addition to that, when we scan, let's say after working hours, well, then the network doesn't look like it does normally. Think of containers, virtualization, and even here in these COVID-19 days, where a lot of people are working from home. So as mentioned earlier, relying on the CV and NVD database will leave a big blind spot of about 30 to 35%. If we compare that to the vulnerability intelligence approach, let's see how we can mature our vulnerability management by using the intelligence. So let's say a new vulnerability comes out in Apache Spouse version 1.0. We look to figure out where we have that software installed. But why would we try to scan the entire network looking for something we already know is installed? So what we can do instead is that we get the alert from our VI feed, including all the details needed about the attack vector, the impact, if there is a solution, the severity score, and all the details that we need to start the remediation process. So the point here is that you can be much more proactive and a much faster reaction time to start the remediation. Think about that. You get an instant alert as soon as a new vulnerability is out, which impact your asset, and within 24 hours, you're able to start the remediation. No need to move or to wait for the next scheduled scan. So basically, we can shift the whole process to the left. And there's no false positives here, and there's no intrusive. Let's go into a little bit more details about what is vulnerability intelligence. Let me first speak to the vulnerability ecosystem. 10 years ago, you could keep track of most of the vulnerabilities by tracking a few mailing lists. But since it has become much more decentralized, today we need to track thousands and thousands of sources, which is news groups, mailing lists, deep web, dark web, changelog, chat forums, vendor sites, and much, much more. VI is about daily monitoring thousands of sources for information about new vulnerabilities, but it doesn't end there. Then we need to verify it, validate it, analyze it, refine all the data in a structured way so the end user can digest it and use it to take a risk-based decision each day. We also need to correct all the mistakes, add explanation, tech notes, references, links to solution, and capture if there is any exploits available. It is also about having an in-depth understanding and knowledge to score each vulnerability correctly and accurately using the CVSS framework, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. And on top of that, we need to continue to monitor the vulnerability as new information might be disclosed a week later. So for example, a vulnerability gets out and then a week later the exploit is being released. Well, that would certainly change the priority of the vulnerability. And therefore it's important that you continuously can rely on having a source that would feed you that new information. And one example here is that the CVSS score, the base score of CVSS, will not change because our exploit has been released, but surely the prioritization for that vulnerability should change as that would increase the risk. All that groundwork is happening 24/7 by security researchers processing a large volume of data to alert the end user so they can work with the vulnerability intelligence. In other words, VI is not about scanning. One second here. Yeah. So let's look at how we can apply that to the vulnerability management in practice. A good foundation for every vulnerability management process is to know your asset. Because you can say, if you don't know what you have, well, then we have an even bigger problem. How can we protect something that we do not know? So it's a really key part to have the asset part organized in your CVDB or have insight to it. When you have that, well, then you're able to map and match that with the VI. So you can get an instant alert, and based on the details and all the metadata, you can start to review and prioritize which vulnerabilities poses the highest risk to your asset. And then based on that, we can start to do the remediation. So adding real vulnerabilities, adding real intelligence to the process, then the need for scanning is greatly diminished. The result of that would be a continuous, non-intrusive, risk-focused discovery, which would enable immediate attention to prioritize and start the remediation. As mentioned earlier, we need to prioritize because if everything is critical, nothing is critical. And we need to take the risk-based approach. Many organizations use CVSS, but that should not stand alone. VulnDB also has its own classifications, which is what you see on this page. That is designed to help you assess the risk and prioritize. It means that the researchers will investigate each and every vulnerability that comes out and then label the exact right classifications, helping the end user to understand the attack vector, the attack type, the impact on your asset, if there's any level of exploits, if there is a solution, and much more. But what the researchers also do is to, for example, pick up on the intel where we use the classifications myth, fake, or not a vulnerability. What I mean by that, it would be easy for the team to ignore that because no action is needed. But then we would risk that the users do take action and in best case, waste time, but in worst case, harm themselves. So therefore, we do not ignore that, but actually alert, but it's being labeled myth, fake, or not a vulnerability. Let me show you an example of what that means. Myth, fake is used when we see inaccurate and invalid reports. Not a vulnerability is used when the research is valid, however, it does not meet the definition of being a vulnerability, which means that there is no privilege escalation and there is no security impact. But see how many times this happens. There are 559 entries in the database with a myth-fake classification, yet there are 362 of those that has a CVE ID. And the same goes for the not a vulnerability, more than 2,500 and more than 1,400 with a CVE ID. All of these issues require zero action for you, yet it would likely end up in your system because it's being also assigned the CVE IDs. So even that they try to improve their capturing and their coverage, we actually see that the quality is dropping. But again here, it's essential that you have a source which will be able to validate and analyze the tons of data that is floating around out there, as we cannot just push data from one side to the other. And that's exactly what the VI is about, is having the in-depth knowledge and skills to dig into the details of all the tons of reports that is coming across. Another example of what VI can do. With the aggregated data throughout years of research, we are able to get a unique insight and understanding of which vendors and products put us most at risk. Which vendor and product are most likely to get the next data breach? What you see an example of here using Android is that there is a 5-star crash test rating, which basically is rolling up all the metadata and then outline on a 5-star scale, how well does that product or vendor perform. This is easy to understand and something that everyone can pick up on without having an in-depth technical knowledge. We can also use this to understand which of our vendors and products are most secure. We can look at the cost of ownership, which is very important because especially when we use open source software, well, yes, it might be for free, but it doesn't come for free to maintain the security. Furthermore, we evaluate the disclosure interval. So if this case, I am responsible for Android, I shall expect a new vulnerability getting out every 6 days. Then we also look at something called code maturity, which evaluate the type of vulnerabilities that discovered in a given product, as that speaks to the actual maturity of that code. Furthermore, we would look at the vendor response time. So when the researchers knock on the door and say, I found a vulnerability in your product, how quickly do the vendor actually respond to that? As a consumer of their product, it would largely matter how quickly their response time is in terms of how serious they take security. But that doesn't end there. Then we would look at how quickly do they fix it? How quickly do we see a patch or an update coming out? And how quickly do we see exploits being released? Furthermore, we would be able to see the path over the time and then basically understand which vendors and products are getting worse or getting better. What you also would be able to do is to zoom in on this to look up the specific vendors and products that you care about. In this example here, we can look at Android versus Apple iOS. That's always the two systems that are up against each other. Recently, there was a lot of talk about Zoom. So you could, for example, see, okay, so how would Zoom and WebEx compare to each other? Or consider that you need a new firewall and you question, should that be Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco, Checkpoint, or SonicWall? All the different decisions that you make about purchasing new software, you would be able to consult the knowledge of VI that can help you to understand the cost and the risk that goes together with these decisions. But it's also something that management and procurement team can use to negotiate the agreement with your software suppliers, as you would have very clear insight into the risk and the cost of ownership that is applied to your organization by using that piece of software. That brings me to the summary here. So basically, just to summarize, relying on CV and NVD will leave you with a big blind spot. Absolutely. It is not needed to scan to detect a vulnerability. If you receive an alert from, for example, VulnDB, and you use that product, then you are vulnerable. With the volume of vulnerabilities that we're dealing with today, everyone are forced to prioritize. And to do that in an efficient manner, you will need the valid intelligence. So in conclusion with that, we would say, well, let somebody else do the vulnerability intelligence so you can do the vulnerability management. If you want to understand more about the details of what we do here at RBS and the research we do on the vulnerability scope, then you can turn to the RBS website and you can pull down our QuickView reports, which elaborate on all the details and the research that we do. With that, we would open the floor for any questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was really interesting. I do have a couple of questions here already, and I'm quite excited about one of them because it's a really good one that I've heard before. I'm going to group together a couple of questions here and paraphrase, but here it is. I already have more vulnerabilities than I can handle, and it seems like what you're talking about with vulnerability intelligence would just add to that pile. Why would I want to see more vulnerabilities than I can handle?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer to that would be it doesn't really is about the quantity, but about the quality. So there will always be more than what you can handle. But if you want to get most security out of the capacity that you have to handle the vulnerabilities, then it would be important that you handle the ones that are most critical to your organization. And that's exactly why you would need the level of details that can help you to find out which vulnerabilities you need to fix first. So again, it's not a question of fixing everything at the same time. It's a question of understanding which one are most critical and then fix those first.
Got it. So more vulnerabilities, more detail allows you to better prioritize according to your specific, assets and so on. Really, I think you kind of touched on this one a little as you went along, perhaps after the question was asked, but I still think it's worth addressing here. Someone is saying, are you saying that we don't need to use scanners anymore?
No, this is not to say scanners doesn't have any value or don't use them at all. It's to point out the limitation, as it would be wrong to have the expectation that applying a scanning tool would be sufficient. So in the combination of having the VI intelligence in combination with the scanning would give you a strong security suite, because there are still things that the scanning tools can be very helpful for, which the VI tool cannot do. But so keep the scanners, but you will not be able to have a proactive approach to your vulnerability management if you just rely on the scanning technologies.
Got it. Thank you, Michael. That looks like the end of the questions. If any more questions come in, I will just read them out here. But I do want to just thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. I know a lot of people are, staying isolated and staying safe. That's fantastic. I hope you're all healthy and well. Please do subscribe to the RBS channel here on Bright Talk and hit that subscribe button, and check out the rest of the information you can find on our website, which is on your screen right now, riskbasedsecurity.com. You can find us on all the usual social media channels, and you can reach Michael by emailing sales@riskbasedsecurity.com. Thank you again for joining us. No more questions, so let's end it here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye for now.